All right, everybody, we are back. This is Creativity is the Cure. I am your host, Malcolm Moore, and today I have a very special guest, the one and only Rob Wallis. How you doing?
I'm good, Malcolm. How you doing?
I'm great. I'm out here in Palmdale, California. Where are you today?
I am at the beautiful Jersey Shore.
And how's the weather?
It's a little cold. I'm getting tired of winter, but it's beautiful down here, and it's quiet because we're in a beach town, and our lights flash during the winter. They don't even, go red and green, and it's great. It's nice and quiet. It is beautiful. We take long walks on the beach with our dog, and it's a nice place to be, even in the winter.
And what kind of dog do you guys have?
He's a rescue. He's half boxer and half many other things. I think his father was a Rolling Stone, I think. So he's probably a bit of a wild man,
Hudson Music is a producer, publisher, and distributor of educational music books and video. Founded in 1998 by Robert Wallis and Paul Siegel. While originally focused on DVDs and VHS as its primary delivery format, their catalog has adapted and developed over time to include books, ebooks, digital streaming video, apps, audio, and more products designed to educate and inspire. With a current product catalog featuring over 1,000 titles, Hudson Music and HudsonMusic.com is a leader in drum education for the 21st century and beyond. Now, I got to tell you, Rob, when I was doing research for this interview, I started to feel really old. I remember when all these things were coming out. I mean, I'm about to turn 55, so I remember in the 80s in high school when the Steve Gadd VHS came out, and not everybody had a VHS player, and we would all, all the drummers, we'd get along, we would trade videos. And I think people today, they probably don't know it, but they take it for granted that you can just go on YouTube and figure out how to play something. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I was younger, if I wanted to learn a Buddy Rich drum part, my parents had given me this really old record player that you could slow down to the 16 speed.
Right.
And that's
right.
how we would do it back then, right? We're like, oh my God, that's so fast. How did he play it? And we would slow it down. And
absolutely.
Did you do that too? I mean, I had that with a really old record player where it was a bench and it played, I think, 16, 45, 33, and 78. Do you remember those?
Absolutely. I had this little tiny one it was a self-contained, the first one I got was like in this plastic case. It was a self-contained phonograph with a speaker. It was probably about an inch and a half oval speaker.
Yeah.
The sound quality was terrible, but that's what you used. I would actually prop the phonograph up. I couldn't plug headphones into it. I don't even know if there were headphones at that point. But when I started, I would prop it up as close to my ear and turn it up and try to play along with records. That's how we all got started in those days, That's what
we did. And it was really tough if you wanted to learn something. Like when I first heard about Tony Williams, I'd have to go to the library and take out a record and then just try to figure it out and hope that maybe if I got Modern Drummer magazine in the mail, they might write out the part I was trying to figure out.
Very much so. We that was really the whole idea behind my first label, which was DCI Music Video. That's the label that we did, the two early Gadd videos and Jocko and
right. And can I ask that came out of the Drummers Collective, right? That was the first thing.
Yes, I was actually a student at Drummers Collective and met my soon-to-be business partner, Paul Siegel. He was working the front desk so that he could afford to pay for lessons. He worked there as like a barter thing.
Yeah.
And we became acquaintances. It was before we were even friends. We had gone out to lunch once or twice and talked, and all of a sudden he said, Rick, the original founder of Drummers Collective, wants to sell and move back to Boston to be involved in the family business. And next thing we know, we talked to Rick, and we didn't have any money, so we paid him for the instruments over a couple of years' time. And suddenly I was 25 years old, and I owned a business in Manhattan, and it was a crazy thing. But yes, to answer your question, a lot of guys would come in and do, these were the very early days of drum clinics. We had a kind of a common area room that could seat, 40 people or something like that.
Right.
And guys would come in, and I had a friend that I was in a band with that said, he's got a friend that worked for one of the big TV stations in New York.
Right.
I think it's CBS or NBC. And he said, my friend's telling me about this thing that's going to be coming. Everyone's going to have a machine in their living room, and they'll be able to play movies on their television.
And I remember they were really big back then. Remember the gigantic VHS players?
Yeah, they were huge. It was like an accordion box, practically. Yeah. So, I started to think about what he said, and I knew nothing about video.
Right.
Nor my business partner. We were drummers. And next thing you know, we figured out, let's get a couple of guys with some cameras, and we'll tape a few lights up to the ceiling, which we actually burned the ceiling panels because we knew nothing. So we almost started a fire. But
oh my gosh,
we started going to guys and say, hey, why don't we do this? We'll try to sell them. Let's see what happens. And if we sell them, we'll pay a royalty to you. So, we did it. And some of the earliest, was Bernard. We did one with Bernard Purdy.
That was the first one?
That was the first one.
Okay.
And then I think Lenny White might have been, I don't remember the exact order.
Right.
But Lenny White, John Schofield, a drummer named Yogi Horton. And I didn't want to skip ahead,
but I love Yogi Horton. And I remember that one blew my mind. I think the first two that I saw was Steve Gadd and then the Yogi Horton. But I'm a big David Byrne fan, and I love this album that he had Yogi play drums on called The Catherine Wheel. If people that know Talking Heads, that stuff's real poppy music. This is kind of experimental instrumental music. I think it was for Twyla Tharp for a dance choreography type of thing. But anyway, I don't want to skip around too much, but I'm a music teacher and I also teach private drums. And I try to stress to my students that because of things like Beat Detective and computers that correct drumming, when we were younger, you could turn on the radio and I could tell by the drum roll, oh, that's Bill Bruford or that's Tony Williams. I could tell even by their drum roll, but now because everything is corrected, it's really lost a lot of personality. That being said, somebody like Yogi Horton, the guy was like a machine. I mean, his time was so solid. He was such a unique drummer. I can't think of anybody who he sounded like back then. However, I do hear his influence in a lot of R&B drummers today, especially the gospel style of playing, almost the symmetrical way that he would use his right and left hand. And I urge everybody to look up Yogi Horton, especially the video you guys did. He was just so incredible and, of course, met an untimely death. But, boy, he left a lot of great music. I think he played with Hall & Oates, John Lennon, a lot of great people. Could you tell me a little bit about working with him? Because I especially love his drumming. Yeah,
he was, a great loss to the drumming world and the music world, as you said, Malcolm. He was a great guy. The way that came together was a good friend of mine that I was in a band with at the time was a synth player, and he was actually the synth player in Ashford and Simpson.
That's right.
Yogi had been the longtime drummer for A&S. And, one day he introduced me and I told Yogi about what we were doing. We had, done a couple of videos at that point. And he said, sure, let's give it a shot. So he came in on a Sunday morning and he just, he had never taught, he had never done a drum clinic, but he did this beautiful kind of almost like a presentation where he played and talked at the same time.
Yeah, I was just watching it last night. It's crazy.
Yeah, right. He was a really good person and really, kind of a sad end, very sad ending. But he was a monster. He had one of the most solid backbeats I've ever heard in person. I went to a rehearsal or two with my friend to see Ashford and Simpson rehearse. One was I think Yogi was on a rehearsal I went to with Roberta Flack, where Luther Vandross, this was before he became a solo artist. He was a background singer who did a lot of background records, and he was like a first call jingle singer in New York at the time.
Wow.
And the rehearsal, was amazing to hear Luther singing with Roberta Flack and Yogi. It was just this incredible band.
Yeah.
But his backbeat, it would stare the hair off your neck. You would just like, whoa, And like you said, his time was impeccable.
Yes.
And did a lot of great records. He was in Luther Vandross's band at the time of his passing, besides Ashford and Simpson. And, he's doing a lot of different dates in New York, but a great drummer. And I agree with you. I think in terms of the current and the last bunch of years of gospel drumming, I think Yogi, kind of set that path for a lot of people. Yeah. So people should definitely reach out and look him up and see what you can see on Yogi, because he's somebody that should be listened to and not forgotten about.
Yeah, a lot of times if I play something like that for some of my younger students, they think it's a drum machine or a computer. I'm like, no, dude, you really had to be able to play back then, and that's how perfectly this guy could play.
Yeah. It was the early days also of click tracks.
Yes.
And, now I think so many records are so perfect even just hearing them. I think good time kind of seeps into your soul.
Yeah.
If you listen back to some of the early rock and roll records or records that were made, in the 60s and 70s, I think, you can hear speeding up, slowing down. That music had a more breath. And wow. I think something may have been lost in trying to be perfect, but there was a mindset, definitely for a certain period of time, I would say in the 70s,
yes,
that the records had to be metronomic. And so, drummers started playing with click tracks. A lot of guys didn't like it. Some producers didn't like it. They wanted the music to breathe more.
Right.
But the guys that could play with clicks did a lot of work in New York. And, certainly Yogi's time he was one of those guys that was comfortable playing with a click and could kind of bury it. You wouldn't even hear it in the mix when you're, listening live in the studio. The backbeat, his time was so on that the click would sort of disappear,
Well, I'm glad that you brought up the thing of music breathing at certain times throughout history. Obviously, I think of Stuart Copeland with the Police. They were so tight playing together, but it was interesting to hear how, like in a chorus, they might speed up, slow back down on the verse. And I think this is a good segue into Steve Gadd, because one of the books that you helped put out, Gadd, A Life in Time, he talks about in there how when he was playing with Tony Levin, they both had to learn to play on the beat, behind the beat, and ahead of the beat. And I think as a drummer myself, and I'm sure you know this, when you sit in with a band, you have to figure out where everybody's playing. I currently play in a blues band that we've been through 4 bass players. And I remember one guy was on the beat, one was behind, and one was ahead of the beat. And you really have to be able to lock in and keep the band together. And it's not that any of those things are right or wrong. It's just a different way. A lot of people say the East Coast, everybody plays ahead of the beat. West Coast is a little bit behind. But I think as a drummer, you're bringing up a good point that you need to be able to play to a click, but also you better be able to sit with some guys that are just playing free and follow if they want to speed up or slow down.
Absolutely. I think there's a few things at play, because I've also played with, a bass player or two that they were very accomplished musicians, but we just didn't feel the time in the same place.
Right.
And I think that comes across in the music, when you hear guys that are really locked in and just, it could be the simplest thing, but if they're feeling it in the same place, the music, really bounces and dances to me.
Yeah.
And I think Steve is a great example of being able to do that with, kind of a multitude of bass players,
right.
Will Lee and Tony Levin and Eddie Gomez and Jimmy Johnson and, on and on, when they play together, it must give so much comfort to the artist, like to James Taylor, or whoever it is. It must give them a lot of comfort because they can feel that solid pulse and, the groove just happening. They know it's going to be great every night, So they can concentrate on performing, singing, whatever it is. I think it's an interesting point, and it's organic. Sometimes, and there were some guys that were good friends that I'd play with a bass player, and it just didn't sit right.
Yeah.
And I would think about why is that, whereas other bass players sit in, you meet him the first time and he feels like, a lifelong brother, it's an interesting thing, but I think that's one of the organic, unspoken things that happen, to drummers and in rhythm sections in general,
Well,
And
we also
it,
know,
like,
as a drummer, everything's our fault, so we better fix it.
I don't know. I never felt that way, because if you're a drummer and somebody is rushing and you want to kind of keep the band together, if it
Right.
it's getting a little chaotic, let's say.
Yeah.
If guys are playing a little too many notes and it gets a little chaotic, I think the drummer's role is to kind of keep it simple and make sure everyone's feeling the pulse really.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes it's a push and a pull, but I do think the drummer has the ability, maybe more so than anyone else in the band, to dictate where the time is, whether it's going to be, laying a little behind or pushing a little ahead.
Right.
I think it's easier for a drummer to make that adjustment. Like, let's say you're doing a gig and a singer turns around and says, play it a little faster. I think the drummer's the one that can make that, slight adjustment
Right.
live in real time, more so than a keyboard player or a guitar player. I think the drummer can kind of make those little, alterations in time easier than anyone else. But I absolutely feel it's everyone's duty in the band to play time that feels good and play together, and there's no one person that's responsible or not responsible for the time. I think it's just a question of, everybody kind of feeling it in the same place and with the right mentality.
Right. And that's why I encourage all my students, the more live playing you can do, the better. To have your experience, to be in a room with other people and have eye contact and watch people's hands and stuff like that. You know what makes me feel better always? I've been lucky enough to know Steve Gadd and see him play up close on a lot of different venues with a lot of different artists. And no matter what, what I love is that before a song starts, he's got his metronome and he doesn't mind how many people are in the audience, whether it's 200 or 2,000. He's going to look at the metronome and make sure even he, with impeccable time, has got the right tempo. And that just blows my mind that he's that humble that he doesn't care if anybody sees him do that. I know it might sound ridiculous, but you would think someone like that wouldn't even need to think about it. But he knows how important it is that when you play live, you're going to have adrenaline, and we should all be starting right at the same point.
Absolutely. And I think someone like Steve, for the guys that play that much with different artists, different material, if they're 2 weeks on with one band and then they go 3 weeks with another band, I think there's a comfort to knowing that they're starting the song in the right spot.
Yeah.
A really interesting thing I was able to witness many years ago was when Dennis Chambers played in Steely Dan. He was, I think, the second, once they started touring again, I think Peter Erskine may have done the first live, tour that they did. And I think Dennis came in after Peter. Right. And I remember, I was very close with Dennis. We had done a bunch of different projects together. And I said, listen, Dennis, Steely Dan's one of my all-time favorite bands. I've never seen them play live. They stopped, for like 30 years, performing. Yeah. I said, I know you're rehearsing with them in New York at SIR, and if you don't get me into a rehearsal, I don't think we're ever going to be able to speak again. So, I knew when the rehearsals were like for, a week long, whatever it was, and I knew that the clock was ticking, and one morning, Dennis calls up and he said, okay, I got you in, be at SIR, 1 o'clock, this afternoon. And, you can be able to listen. We're running the entire show down. So amazing. I went up there. It was me, I think Walter Becker's son or little daughter, like the nanny, and me. I sat in a folding chair next to the soundboard in the middle of the big room at SIR in CBOA. Wow. And they ran the whole show, but the reason I mentioned this story was Donald Fagen. I don't remember which tune it was because it was a long time ago. But he stopped the band and he'd say to Dennis, "Let's try it again. Can you give me one click faster on the metronome?" And Dennis would set his metronome, count the band off, and play it. And they'd play like 30 seconds or a minute. And Fagen would say, "All right, can you go one more click faster?" I mean, they were going through the songs like click by click, with the click track, like
That's
one
incredible.
note at a time. And he'd say, "Oh yeah, I like that. Mark that down. That's where we want to do it." It was pretty fascinating.
Well, in some ways, it doesn't. If you like that band, it doesn't surprise me how precise they need to be, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to go over a few of my favorite things that you've helped produce and put together, and just pipe in and tell me some thoughts or reflections. I really am enjoying the two recent Steve Gadd books. One of them, Gadd: A Life in Time, which to me is almost like a biography with also some notation. And then Gaddaments, which is a rudimentary book that you helped Steve put together. What was it like working on those with Steve, and what led to both of those books, which are pretty different?
Let's start with Gaddaments, which came out first. That was totally an outgrowth of COVID.
Yeah.
Steve was home, as we all were, and he had never been not working for that length of time, and since he was probably a teenager.
Right.
He was off the road, stuck at home in Arizona, and one day Carol called up, Steve's wife, and said, "Rob, you got to help me out here. He's driving me crazy. He has these rubber-tipped sticks, and he's playing all over the house. At 2 a.m, he's in the kitchen." So I said, "All right."
The Vic Firth sticks, right, with the rubber tips?
Yeah, the Vic Firth with the rubber tips.
Those are great.
So I called him back and I said, "Steve, what, Carol told me you're working on some things, for your hands. Like, what are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, in his very, kind of laid back way, he said, I'm working on rudiments, but I'm putting different patterns together. And I think it's some unique stuff. I've never heard, some of this stuff played this way."
Yeah.
I said, "Oh, really?" So he said, "Yeah." He said, "Why don't we, let's do a Zoom call. I can show it to you." So we Zoomed, and, I think he was in his kitchen at the time playing on the counter, and he was showing me these patterns that he was doing. And they were really challenging, but they felt really good to play, even really slow.
Right.
And I said, "Man, I would love to, I think a book like this with this kind of content would be really cool, especially coming from you."
Yeah.
And that was really how it all started. It was that quick and that easy. He said, "All right, well, if you're interested, I'm going to start writing down some of the stuff that I'm doing." And it took us about a year.
Wow. Yeah.
He would work on stuff, and then he started going on the, some gigs were happening, and then he'd come home and he'd work on it some more. And he was working on it in the hotel rooms and stuff. We would Zoom, and he would play it for me, and also Joe Bergamini, our editor, was on those calls. And, we would talk about the patterns and accents. One funny story, the book was just about done, and Steve went to England. This was at the tail end. I mean, we were still in a lockdown in COVID.
Yeah.
But he went to record an Eric Clapton record, which I said, "Man, with COVID, you're going over to England?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "We're going to be in a bubble." The whole band and anyone involved in the record stayed together, and they were like sort of bussed back and forth from I think an inn somewhere. They probably took over the whole inn, and they weren't interacting with very many people, and it was under real guidance,
of course.
So one night Steve calls up. It was about 11 o'clock at night here, maybe 10 o'clock at night on the East Coast, and he's in the UK. I knew it was 5 or 6 hours ahead. So I'm saying, the first call came in. He said, open up the book real quick. I'm looking at page, 18, and I want you to change the last two accents at the bottom of the page, whatever. And I said, okay. And then I said, all right, I'll talk to you soon. And he hangs up. Like 10 minutes later, another phone call. Go to page 27. The first bar on line 2, I want 2 accents there, I said, listen, Steve, it's 5 o'clock in the morning where you are. You got to go to bed. I don't want Eric calling me up in the morning saying you're tired in the studio. But that's, that really, to me, besides being a true story and a funny story, that's Steve's work ethic, which people may not know a lot about. I mean, once he is committed to a project, he is all in. Yeah. And he doesn't put a period on the end of it until he's gone through it, and is really satisfied with what's there. It was Steve's idea to actually do the music notation in the old, pen and ink.
Yeah, I love that.
We found a guy who had just retired from doing, that was his profession. He would do a lot of the Broadway scores. And he had retired. He put his pen and ink set, away. Right. And I talked him into doing one last project. And, I think he, at this point, would never do it again because we had him, because it's all handwritten,
I was wondering about that. It's really, the aesthetics are beautiful of the book.
The aesthetic was beautiful. Steve had a great idea. He wanted it to have that classic look like the Stone and Wilcoxon book. Mm-hmm. And
absolutely,
but it was difficult to do because you couldn't just go in and change a note like you can in Finale or one of the programs.
Right. Oh my gosh, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, you have to rewrite the whole page.
Oh, geez.
So we had this poor fella redoing page after page as Steve would change and change notes or add accents, whatever it was. It was funny. We wore him out pretty good.
It's like the calligraphy of drumming notation.
Yes. Yeah. But this guy did a great job. And, what's really funny is Steve has been threatening the last 6 months, while he's on the road. He still has these rubber tip sticks, and he's put together a whole bunch of new exercises. And I've actually seen a couple on Zoom calls. Yeah, they're really good. So, we'll see. He keeps threatening to, really start putting pen to paper. He remembers this stuff. His mentally, it's unbelievable. He just remembers when he does these patterns. He'll say, "Oh yeah, this is something I'm working on," and I'll say, "Write it down." He said, "I will," but he said, "I got it. Don't worry. I got it." And he remembers this stuff like note for note that he plays. It's pretty incredible. Yeah. So maybe there'll be a Gaddamans part 2. We'll see.
I hope so. My students really like it, and they're such dense books that with a couple students we've spent a few weeks on one page.
Oh, totally. And it's worth it because your hands just work better when you play that stuff.
Yeah, really to think outside the box and the whole thing on how he's displacing. It's almost like playing modes and scales, starting at a different place where you don't normally start, but rhythmically.
Right.
Okay, exactly. How about Gadd, A Life in Time, which is more to me like a biography that also happens to have a lot of notation?
We had done a couple of books in that kind of format, which was, part biography, part, transcription, and part, kind of home photo.
Like the Stuart Copeland one. Similar,
like
right?
the Cobham, we did one with Neil Peart. It was the first one we did. Stuart just released a brand new one that's beautiful with Billy Cobham.
Oh wow!
It was great working with him. But Steve's, after we finished Gaddamans, I said, "Listen, if you want to be a glutton for punishment, I have an idea for another book." And he was into it. He enjoyed. We hadn't worked together in many years. We worked together a lot in the 80s.
Right.
And then in the early 90s, we did an anniversary show for Drummers Collective, the 25th anniversary show, and Steve's band was the the kind of headliner.
Right.
So, we got to spend some time on that. And then, we really didn't do much for a long time. So it was great to kind of get in that routine again of working together. So he was real comfortable. And I said, look, I sent him out the Copeland and Neil Peart books. I said, this is what I'd like to do with you. We'll decide on the songs. You'll check the transcriptions. You won't have to do them. We'll have them done, but you'll approve them. And, we'll go through some of your photo, your family's photo archives, and we'll put some nice pictures together.
Yeah.
And that's really, how it happened. That was also another one that took about a year.
It's amazing that only took you a year, because it's really comprehensive. And I'd always been bummed out there wasn't a really good Gadd biography. But you guys knocked it out of the park. I mean, I can't believe you pulled that together in a year. It's a really beautiful book.
Thank you. Having worked with Steve since the early 80s and being such a huge, fan, really, I was very familiar with his playing and kind of the key, landmark songs and records that show different aspects of his playing. So, not that it was easy, but it came easy on that project. And Joe Bergamini, who actually wrote all the text, obviously also a huge fan of Steve's. But we kind of kept digging. Joe would think the book was done, and I'd say, you know what? We really do need to do an interview with Eddie Gomez. So we would do a call with Eddie and ask him questions about different records, and then Joe would transcribe it and put that. And I think, I just think we need one more. I really think Tony Levin, we can't put the book out without including Tony.
My favorite bass player. He's the best.
Yeah, he was so great and gracious with his time, but everybody was so thrilled, to be involved.
Yeah.
I had done an interview for a documentary that Zildjian asked us to put together for the award show that they did for Steve.
Right. Is that the ADAA one?
Yeah, the ADAA one. So we did these really nicely produced by, it was shown in 2 parts that night in the theater.
Right.
And Eric Clapton couldn't be at the show that night. James Taylor played and Paul Simon played.
That's right.
But Clapton couldn't do it. So I said to his people over, in the UK, I said, listen, what if I come over and interview Eric, and we cut him in the video?
Wow.
He can't be at the show. And he was totally amenable for that. So I went over with a cameraman and interviewed Eric. And so we had some content that we extracted from that interview for the book, so that, Eric, Steve's kind of working with Eric was included. And then the same thing with Chick Corea. For the same show, Chick wasn't able to make it.
Right.
So we interviewed Chick. And so, we were even able to include guys like that in the book that weren't, available. I mean, obviously Chick has passed.
Right. And you had so much content that you could delve into and utilize.
Exactly.
Was that was that the documentary DVD or whatever that ends with Super Steve flying through the air?
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got to ask. That really, a lot of people don't know about Steve's sense of humor, but I remember bursting out laughing the first time I saw that. And then I couldn't remember where I saw it, but it's at the end of ADAA. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, What's the story behind that?
I remember Steve had showed me that, many years ago, and it was done by somebody in Japan.
That's what I thought.
With technology, it made him look like Superman flying through the sky with a cape on. And they just, did this and I guess gave it to Steve. So I had remembered it. I had to hunt it down, but we were able to find it and put it on there. Because, Steve's sense of humor,
oh, my God.
He's like the ultimate, joke man and one-liner guy.
But, when you first get into him, you see him playing, you think he's a very serious guy. But, I'll just say, if you go onto YouTube, number one, look up Steve Gadd juggling salt. That's one of my favorite ones.
Yeah.
And then also the pizza delivery is so bizarre.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
He lives for and loves a good laugh. And what I find really humorous in its own way is when he tells a joke, he laughs at it as hard as if he's hearing it for the first time, and he has an amazing memory for jokes. I mean, I think some people just have that gift. I'm not one of them. I have a hard time remembering jokes, but Steve will remember jokes like forever.
He's very good, and also he's got pretty good self-depreciating humor. I think one time I saw him, this was quite a while ago, play with James Taylor at the Bowl, and I got to be backstage a little bit and watch from the side, and that was the first time I saw him play with two brushes in each hand. I mean, of course, for late in the evening and seeing the sticks. And so I come up with my nerdy, I'm like, Steve, where did you develop that technique? And what are you trying to do with that? He goes, I'm just fucking around, Malcolm.
Yeah. He's a great guy. He's a great guy to hang out with. He's so humble.
Yes. He and Carol are two of the most kind, compassionate, humble people I've ever met in my life.
Yeah. Likewise. I've spent, over the years, going back to the early '80s, a lot of time with Steve, going to gigs with him, going to sessions, going to PAS shows and, being around him in different situations. And he's always the same. And he never is short to look somebody in the eye, answer a question as best he can, sign an autograph. I mean, he's never different than that person that you hope he is, and he really is that way.
He's been very kind and met a lot of my students. And of course, can't forget that he loves dogs. Yeah,
right. That's right.
A lot of my students are nervous about meeting him. I go, tell him about your dog. And then everything becomes very fun and laid back.
Yeah, he's so, after, you start the conversation, he's so kind of disarming and so genuine,
yes.
It's and then if you have a joke ready for him, that's a good joke. I mean, he's your best friend immediately,
Yeah. Yeah, he's very inspiring. Actually, one more quick question about Steve. I remember, I don't have this video anymore, but I'll never forget when I first saw the VHS that you did of Giovanni Hidalgo and Steve Gadd. I think was this in Woodstock, New York, where they did it? And it was for a 1997 Modern Drummer Festival?
Yeah, exactly.
Tell me a little bit about that, because I love that. And I would love to get another copy somehow.
Yeah, I would too. It was with a catalog that we had sold a long time ago. I'd love to get a hold of it. What happened there was our first label, DCI Music Video, we had done a bunch of different projects with Giovanni Hidalgo, the great conga player.
Astounding player. Yeah.
Changed I kind of liken Giovanni to what he did on congas, to what Jaco did on bass, and what Steve did on drums.
Yeah,
or Tony
absolutely
did on drums.
agreed.
Just a game changer. And having spent a lot of time with Giovanni, he just reminded me of like a Latin version of Steve. Loved to laugh, loved a good joke, brilliant musician, brilliant mind. They were like out of the same mold. And my business partner at the time, Paul, we say, like, whenever we see one of the others, like, wow, Giovanni reminds me of Steve, or Steve reminds me of Giovanni. So, we had gotten, close enough with each of them to say, at some point it would be nice for you guys to meet each other. And, maybe there's some music in there that can happen. And I forget exactly where and how the introduction happened, but we introduced them to each other. They kind of, they met each other in the studio. Now that I'm thinking, I haven't thought about this whole project, but what happened was we got Modern Drummer to book them both together to close out the festival in '97.
Right.
And they wanted to rehearse, what they were going to play at the festival, for a couple of days. So we went up to Woodstock, where we had been doing a bunch of projects, and we actually filmed them meeting for the first time.
Yeah, is that, I remember there was a behind the scenes segment, and was that at Bearsville? What studio was that at?
Yeah, that one, there were two different studios we were working at, but I think That was Bearsville in Woodstock. I think it was Bearsville. The other one we worked at was called Alair. That's where we did.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah. I think David Bowie recorded there.
Yeah. Well, we brought Neil up there, and then
that's right.
He ended up liking it so much that he brought Rush there, and they did a record there.
Wow.
But yeah, a bunch of people. It was this beautiful studio on the top of a mountain. Really amazing.
So you filmed the rehearsal as well, correct?
We filmed them. You know, we were there for 2 or 3 days, and we had a camera going all the time. It was really. There was one point we were in this kind of little kitchen area and having lunch, and Steve asked Giovanni something about a rhythm, and Giovanni, started playing on the table, and Steve got spoons and started playing on the table.
I love that.
So, I've got to actually try to see if we have any of those tapes.
There's a little bit on YouTube, a couple little clips, but they're really grainy.
Yeah, we should try to resurrect that. Yeah, it was an amazing seeing these two brilliant musicians work together and write this music together, and then it culminated with the performance at Modern Drummer. People lost their minds there.
Well, I gotta say, my favorite part of the whole video, and I've watched it so many times, is when Steve starts doing an ostinato, a repeated pattern with 2 hi-hats. And when I first saw that, I was like, "What?" And it's got like this triplet feel, and then he just starts soloing over that and then trading back and forth with Giovanni. It's just so beautiful and otherworldly.
Yeah. I had forgotten about that. Yeah, I don't even remember how he got the idea to play with 2 hi-hats and no bass drum. But it was amazing. It was an amazing experience. Like, to me, I felt we were, really witnessing history there with these two, brilliant musicians. It'd be like Charlie Parker and Elvin Jones play together.
True. Yeah. Two great masters. Yeah. And I think on behalf of all drummers, I just want to thank you for putting all that content out there, because like I said before, YouTube, that was the only window into how do our heroes play what they play,
Totally. I just, looking back over, kind of, believe it or not, 40 years of doing this work.
Incredible.
I just feel, very blessed to be able to have been a fly on the wall, and most of the time have a camera nearby so we could film what we were able to witness, really, and bring this out. Because when we started, like you said, there were no videos. There was no way, Steve who really kind of put instructional video on the map when we did those videos in 81 and 82. He was working in the studios, day and night. I mean, literally day and night. He would go for days. He was in such demand. I would sometimes, spend time with him going from, one session to the next. And he'd have like 2 or 3 drum sets, and they would just piggyback all around Manhattan. And he'd just go from one session to the next, Well,
and I've heard the story of Rick Marotta actually having to carry him from one studio to another.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. He's just Steve was, besides being the musician that he is and the comedian that he is, he's also a workaholic. So he doesn't like to say no to work, and he would just work continually. It was he couldn't fill the demand, really at that time in the 80s in New York. So you couldn't get to see him play unless you were in New York, and you were lucky enough to be in New York when he was playing at 7th Avenue South with the Breckers or Sanborn or Stuff, something like that.
I mean, for me, being a young drummer, I was lucky enough to meet and see Buddy Rich play a few times, but I would go see him play and just have to all record it with my brain and go home and try to remember what he did. Like, I remember seeing the single stroke roll that to me sounded like a freight train coming in. And I remember I saw Art Blakey with 2 very young players, Branford and Wynton Marsalis. I mean, all these incredible things, but there was no video. And I would just go home and think about it all night. And I wanted to ask you, what has it been like for you with all the technological changes since you've started this? I mean, you've done drum apps, you've done videos, you've done DVD, now you do streaming. What is it like over the breadth of your career to see all the changes?
I mean, the changes have been stark rapid, and either you kind of keep up with them, or you get left behind and somebody else will step in and do it. So we've been lucky enough to kind of see the writing on the wall. For instance, we started doing digital books, and we developed a book reader probably 2 years before COVID hit, 2-3 years, something like that.
Right.
And we were selling digitally. And, it was a struggle because people, for the most part, wanted to still hold on to a physical book so they could make notes in it or,
right.
Whatever. It was just, a habit that had to change and, in some senses be broken. But the writing was on the wall. Digital was such a great format because somebody could be in India and order the book, and within a couple of seconds, have a book instead of having to get it shipped in the mail, lost in the mail, duties paid, customs, all this other stuff. So, we were developing this catalog, and then when COVID hit, it really put the digital book market kind of blossomed. It was one. Unfortunately, it took COVID, but it made it very easy for drummers to get content. So we, started releasing as much as we could, as quickly as we could during COVID, so people had some entertainment at home and could get a hold of these things quickly. And so it's the whole scale now has shifted. Whereas we were doing, at some point, let's say 80% physical books and 20% digital. Well, now it's, 80% digital and 20% physical.
Yeah.
It's completely shifted. And in some ways, the digital format's better because, like with a book like Gadd's, with his video included, you just tap the screen and the video box pops right up there. You don't have to get a disc. You don't have to go to an external website to find the clip. You just tap the icon and boom, you're watching the video, and you close it, and then you work on the stuff yourself. It's a much better format.
Yeah, there's a lot more depth, and for me being a teacher, kids are either audiovisual or kinetic, and the fact that you guys offer all three of those is really pretty cool.
Yeah, it's actually a better format for when there's media involved. If there's audio or video, it just makes it so user friendly and quick. Guys don't have to struggle, and I hope guys like a book like Gadd's or a book like A Life in Time, especially Life in Time. There's like 8 and 9 hours, I think, of video that you get a code you get as part of the project. And there's some incredible video up there, including the first 2 videos unedited that we did back in the early 80s. The original up close and the session videos are part of the package.
Yeah.
So I hope people are utilizing the media aspect of this, as well as just as well as the print, because there's some real gold in there if you dig it up.
Yeah, there's just infinite wealth of information. Now, so my podcast is called Creativity is the Cure, and the whole crux and focus of it, other than getting to know the people that I interview, is how do we all use the creative part of our brain? So, Rob, for you personally, what was your first creative memory that you realized you had that part of your brain that you could just come up with something on the spur of the moment?
I just feel blessed that I've found a way to marry the things that I really love, which is playing drums and documenting great musicians.
Yeah.
I'm not a super technological person.
Right.
I have people that I work with that figure out how I stop the wheel from spinning when I'm downloading something. We've been able to kind of reinvent what we do and kind of how we do it or how we present it. Like you said a bunch of times now, and maybe I was good or lucky to have a little bit of a glimpse into the future. Starting back with, VHS tapes, and then, went to DVD and then digital apps. And, I just, was crazy enough to jump into something new like that. And it didn't always, pan out. Most of the times it did, but there were definitely some projects or some ideas technology-wise. But I don't know, it's not really answering your question. I'd have to really think about the first spark. I guess the first spark to me was hearing, I think, the first record that really excited me, and I didn't even have a record player. My parents had a record player and had this record, which I'm not exactly sure why, but it was Herb Albert and the Tijuana Brass. And I think it was Hal Blaine playing drums.
Yeah.
And it was
the one and only Hal Blaine. Wow.
Yeah. I think it was a song called The Lonely Bull. And it just reached me musically at a very, I was really young. I was maybe 10 years old or something. So I don't know why. No one in my family was musically inclined. But I started playing drums when I was, maybe 10 years old.
Wow.
And, music has always, good music has always, really reached me. I don't know if I should claim it's a good thing or not, but I saw the Bob Dylan No Direction, a complete unknown.
I haven't seen that yet. How is it?
I loved it. I was a mess watching this, the film last night. We saw it in the theater. It was just so powerful to me. The beauty of creativity and what he was doing. Timothy Chalamet was unbelievable, I thought, and I just absolutely love the movie.
I can't wait to see it.
Some people say it's sanitized. Dylan was this, Dylan was that. Dylan was a genius and changed the world, really. As one man with his music change, there would be no Springsteen. I mean, you could go on and on if Bob Dylan didn't break certain ground, with what he did. I just love the movie, and I was just totally emotional watching it. I walked out of there. I was like stunned, really. My wife too. We were both so affected by it and so moved by it. So I guess, I don't know, in a roundabout way, maybe to answer your question is, I feel very lucky and blessed that I found something that reached me that deeply, and it was music, and it was from a very young age. And that's why I'm here doing what I still do. Yeah,
and I think the more I talk to you and think about what you do, you're an educator, and you offer a unique perspective to help people learn, help people be inspired. And I'm curious, do you think you got any of your creativity from your parents? Were they creative in any way, or do you recognize parts of their personality in you and what you do today?
No, another good question. They were not particularly creative. My folks owned, for my younger years, a local 5 and 10 store, like the old school 5 and 10s, where they sold everything from needle and thread and yarn and baskets and toys and candy. It was the real old school 5 and 10.
Yeah.
No, there's no, my father went to art school when he was, of college age for a little while in Manhattan.
Yeah.
But he never pursued art. His family kind of pushed him into retail. So we had a small 5 and 10 in a tiny little town in Westchester, New York. It was a cool place, really cool place to grow up, but nothing relating to music or arts or creativity, really. So I don't know, I never really think about it or thought about, where it came from or where my spark came from for music or wanting to do what I do. But it gone full circle. I'm sort of back doing it. I'm playing more, in some ways playing more musically now than ever.
That's good.
I'm playing a bunch and still producing content and hoping to help drummers along the way.
I think you're doing that constantly. Now, we've mentioned a little bit that, a lot of drummers obviously have suffered with depression, anxiety, and unfortunately led to drug abuse or things that are harmful to themselves. Do you think that creativity could be implemented in curing people or at least helping people with their mental health struggles? Have you seen that in all the work you do? Do you think creativity can be an escape, or do you think it's healthy for people's brains? Have you seen it really help any of these artists that we've talked to that you've worked with?
A tough question. I don't really feel qualified to answer it the right way. I mean, I think creativity and finding an outlet, whether it's painting, with a canvas and a brush, or playing an instrument, I think is a great outlet and can lead to being part of a great community.
Yes.
I always say that the drum world is the best fraternity in the world. And I think the drummers really support each other.
Yeah.
More so than other instruments that I've seen. So in that way, finding some outlet for creativity could be good for people if they're lonely or depressed or feel isolated. I mean, I think feeling a part of a fraternity and the camaraderie that goes along with that, I think is a good thing. That's the best answer I can give.
I think that's a wonderful answer.
Yeah, you've touched on some interesting questions that I'm going to think about now for the rest of the day or more.
Well, I have so many more questions, but I think a good thing to do would be make this part one. And if you would agree, Rob, I'd love to talk more about these things and all your projects and creativity. But I have two last questions. I think you probably love Elvin Jones drumming as much as I do. I was lucky enough to see and meet him once. He has a quote here that I really love. He said once, "The greatest contribution jazz has made in music has been to replace the role of the conductor with a member of the ensemble who, instead of waving his arms to keep time and convey mood, is an active member of the musical statement. That person is the drummer." What do you think about that quote?
I love that. Elvin, I was fortunate enough to get to spend some time with him. One day in particular, we had filmed, Zildjian had asked us to go to his apartment and film him talking about his relationship with Zildjian and Zildjian cymbals for the show that they did honoring him. And also in that show was Max, Roy, and Louie.
Wow.
So I got to, we went up there and did the interview. Basically brought just a cameraman and my business partner, Paul, and myself. We went up to his apartment. We did the interview. We kind of asked, it's probably spent, 45 minutes or an hour, talking to Elvin about Zildjian, about his cymbals and so forth. And, we were packing up and I figured we were getting ready to leave. And Elvin said, you guys want to hang out for a few minutes? So I was like, yeah, we'll stay, And the first thing he did, it was kind of mind-blowing. He said, you know what music I'm listening to right now, I'm really into? And it knocked me out of the chair. He played a Pete Seeger CD. Elvin Jones was listening to Pete Seeger.
Yeah.
And it was, just mind-boggling. And, if you've ever heard Elvin speak, he speaks like he plays the drums. There's basses, there's grunts and groans, and there's no one that talks like I could listen to him speak all day long. It was just a remarkable experience. But
I love when you hear like a recording or saw him live, you could hear him growling. That was so cool.
Yeah. He grunted and groaned, and I just think he was, an incredibly interesting and brilliant, musician and drummer.
Yeah, and I was lucky enough. A good friend of mine, Mark Sweetman, he and I went into New York City, I think about 25 years ago, and we got to see him play live. I think it was at the Blue Note, and I'll never forget. We got there early. We saw his wife setting up the drums,
yes,
and tuning them for him. She was a very fascinating, magical type of person. And then I'll never forget, after the show, after all the wonderful music and the growling and the grunting like we talked about, he got up and went around and thanked every single person in the audience for being there. I'll never forget. Wow. He like shook people's hands. He gave me a hug, and I was like, wow, this is one of a kind. And he had that really wild snare drum with the wood hoops and everything. And, you know, right. And I'll be honest, when I was younger, I didn't quite get his drumming, but when I finally saw him play live, it just all made sense. I mean, it was really a spur of the moment improvisational guy that just every time he played, it was different. And you really had to see it to understand it.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
All right, Rob, before we go, what would you like to promote? People want to check out your thousands of projects that you've put together, books and videos and stuff like that. The best thing would probably be to go to the website, right?
Yeah. People should take just a look at hudsonmusic.com. There's everything from books and videos to T-shirts and coffee mugs. We've expanded our whole range of offerings. Just having fun with it, and check out. We're constantly releasing new things. So
what are the latest two things that you put out really quick?
The Billy Cobham book, okay, which is really great, and we did a really, really great book. It was really the drummer's work. He came to us. The book was fairly far along. Ilan Rubin, who's the drummer from L.A., grew up in L.A. He's the current drummer in 9 Inch Nails.
Wow.
And he's a very organized, smart, focused, person, and he's put together, a bunch of material that works great. You can apply it to drum set, you can apply it to fills and grooves, and it's really good stuff. That came out in early December, about a month ago, and it's a fantastic book. The response and feedback's been really good.
Ooh, I got to check that out.
Yeah, start somewhere to go somewhere. And Ilan's he's a fabulous drummer, and he's producing now and writing. He plays. He's a multi-instrument, kind of guy. Very interesting, player. But the book is really, really interesting. I'm really glad he thought of us to help distribute it for him. So yeah, those are the latest two things that I would check out. Billy and Ilan Rubin.
All right. Well, Rob Wallis, thank you so much. This has been a really big blast. Happy New Year, and I hope we can talk again soon.
Yeah, thank you, Malcolm. Best wishes for the new year, my friend.
All right. Thanks very much. Hi, everybody. It's 2025. Happy New Year. If I could ask you one favor, if you could like and subscribe to my podcast wherever you listen to it. My podcast is on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Buzzsprout, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and YouTube. Once again, thank you for listening to Creativity is the Cure.